Imagine a world where public executions were the ultimate entertainment, where a gruesome machine sliced off heads in front of cheering crowds. Now, you might be picturing the French guillotine, but believe it or not, Scotland got there first. Meet the Maiden, a massive blood-soaked execution device used long before the French Revolution. It didn't just kill criminals, it executed nobles, rebels, and even the occasional innocent soul. The blade of the Maiden was said to be so heavy and so sharp that it sometimes sent heads flying several feet. And if you think that's bad, just wait until you hear about the time it was used on its own creator. The story of the Maiden begins in the late 1500s, when Scotland was a land of brutal justice. Before this mechanical monstrosity, executioners had to rely on axes or swords, methods that were messy, inconsistent, and often required multiple blows. That was a problem if you wanted to instill fear in your enemies. By 1563, the execution sword in Edinburgh had become too worn out to use, forcing officials to temporarily borrow one for a beheading. This event made it clear that a more permanent solution was needed. In 1564, under the reign of Mary, Queen of Scots, Edinburgh's provost and magistrates ordered the construction of the Maiden. Records from the time detail its creation, including the addition of a heavy lead weight to the blade to ensure a swift and deadly drop. The device was essentially an early guillotine, a wooden frame with a massive, weighted blade that slid down grooves to separate head from body in an instant, or at least that was the idea. The condemned were forced to kneel and place their necks on a crossbar, roughly 4 feet from the ground. Above them, a razor-sharp blade, weighing around 75 pounds, was set in grooves along the wooden frame. A peg held the blade in place, secured by a cord. When the executioner yanked the cord, the peg was pulled free, sending the blade crashing down, severing the victim's head in a single, brutal stroke. But in some cases, the executioner didn't even need to do the job himself. If the crime involved horse theft, the cord would be tied to the very animal the thief had stolen. With a sharp whip, the horse would bolt forward, yanking the peg free and quite literally executing its former rider. And before you ask, the condemned did not face upwards towards the blade. In the few surviving portraits and documents of the Maiden, the victim was made to kneel at the base of the device. Please, for the love of God, stop suggesting that. The Maiden was not always the clean, efficient killer it was meant to be. Some reports say the blade would sometimes get stuck part-way down, leaving the condemned alive and in agony until the executioner stomped on the frame to force the blade through. And if you think decapitation is an instant death, think again. Some eyewitnesses swore they saw severed heads blink, twitch, or even attempt to speak for a few horrifying seconds after the chop. Naturally, this being gross history, we've done a video on this very subject. Just click the card above in the corner of the screen or click on the picture of the severed head at the end of this video. Over its 145-year career, the Maiden was responsible for over 150 deaths, and the list of victims was grim. One of the most famous was James Douglas himself, the man who helped bring the machine to Scotland. He fell out of favour with the monarchy and was sentenced to death in 1581. His punishment? A date with the Maiden, the very machine he championed. As the legend goes, he showed no fear, running his fingers over the blade before lying down, as if inspecting his own death sentence. Moments later, his head tumbled into the waiting basket. But not everyone met the Maiden with such calm acceptance. Some victims were dragged to their deaths, screaming and struggling. One particularly notorious case involved Archibald Campbell, the first Marquess of Argyll, in 1661. As he was led to the machine, he reportedly fainted from terror and had to be carried the rest of the way. When the blade fell, his headless body twitched violently, blood spurting across the platform as the crowd roared in approval. The gore didn't stop there. Because public executions were a form of entertainment, executioners sometimes put on a show. Heads were held up for the crowd to see, sometimes slapped or even made to nod in mock recognition of the audience. Bodies were left on display, their necks a ragged mess of torn flesh and sinew, and some heads were even mounted on spikes as a warning to others. The smell of blood and death hung in the air long after the event was over. By the late 1600s, the Maiden fell out of use, replaced once again by more traditional executions like hanging. The infamous machine was retired and eventually put on display, where it remains today in the National Museum of Scotland. If you ever visit, take a close look at the blade. You might still see the faint stains of centuries-old blood, a reminder of Scotland's gruesome past. The next time someone brings up the guillotine, you can tell them France was late to the party. Scotland had its own mechanical horror show long before, and the Maiden was every bit as bloody. If you had lived in 16th century Edinburgh, you might have been lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to witness its deadly efficiency firsthand. And if you were really unlucky, well, you might have been the one kneeling before it.